Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Derhodge.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhodge of Authentic Living with Roxanne. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Today I have a special colleague, Kanchan Prinsloo, and we have had the privilege of meeting, a couple of months ago now, right, Kanchan?
That's right.
We're in the same writing group that through our time with COVID, and I was looking for structure. I'm not sure what Kanchan's goal was, but mine was just like, okay, how am I going to get through this time and put some structure to my day? And then I started this writing group, and then a little while back after Kanchan had joined the group. So Kanchan, tell me a little bit about you, and I know how we met, but tell me about Kanchan's background is that she is an executive coach and she works with helping diverse leaders tap into their uniqueness to create impact. And that line, I don't think does it justice. And we were, just kind of talking about how many ways we can kind of go with this talk, but we thought we would just go with the flow. So tell me a little bit about you. Like where did you grow up? Tell me the beginning.
First of all, thrilled to be here, Roxanne. Thanks. Yes, I grew up in Saskatchewan. I was born in India, moved to Canada at the age of about 3, and we moved to a small town in Saskatchewan. My father was the chemistry and physics teacher at the high school, and both my parents held a very strong belief of giving back to community, always leave something better than you've arrived. So they would always give back. So we were deeply immersed in community. And I think I've mentioned it to you, I was around 10 or 11 before I even realized that I was of color. We were completely welcomed into the community. My parents were active, whether it's the Lions Clubs, Lionesses. My father created the science fair for the community for southern part of Saskatchewan. Anyways, we would always be a part of that. And it was a beautiful upbringing, very inclusive, very sort of, as I jest now, but I was the diversity and didn't know it, my 2 brothers. And so moved to Calgary, where my kids were born and raised. We, got married in Saskatchewan, but moved to Calgary. The journey carries on. When our youngest was going off to university, my husband and I decided to move to the UK, to London, to take our practices. My first career, though, was 26 years in healthcare, in leadership positions, both public and private. And what was wonderful about that experience was that, one, I enjoyed the work I did. I was very committed to the work I did in leading teams, and leadership was a passion. I even went and did my master's in leadership at that point. And the second thing, which is I ticked the box for my parents. They really felt that healthcare was an important area to be working in. So once I did those 2 things, I did a postgraduate in executive coaching. And for the last 7 years, I've been working as an executive coach, both starting in the UK and then in London, and then now here in Toronto. My passion in my executive coaching and really the sharp end of the needle is working with women of color and supporting women of color leaders to lead powerfully. And where you think you and I are very connected is the authenticity piece that goes with that. And some of that, especially being here in Toronto and a lot of the corporate spaces I work in, the piece for women of color and leading powerfully means that they really do have to, and I'm going to use the word confidence, and yet I know it's a byproduct of courage, to really tap into who they are, to be able to lead from all of who they are, because it's just so critical, especially in today's day and age.
So that being said, like first executive position that I held, I think I was 28 years old. And at that point, I was one of the only non-white faces. And of course, at that time, I thought nothing of it. And I think you and I were just chit-chatting, right? So I grew up in Trinidad. Again, diversity was always around me. Our presidents were either Black or Chinese or Indian or whatever. My dentist, my doctor, everybody, there was like a 51-49. So I'm like, okay, well, everybody, and then so you say 49, 50 and 1% other, right? Which is the flip of what's here in North America. So, and, yes, there was colonialism and those types of things, but my parents always said, you can do whatever you want to do. And, I the schools that I went to and those types of things, that was it. It was like, just work really hard. You're going to get in trouble if you don't follow through, and you can create your destiny. So when I came to North America, and I was 16 at that time, there was an inherent difference that I kind of started to experience. And I thought, okay, I know there's colonialism and I know there is inherent, differences with white, non-white in the Caribbean. Absolutely there is, but it was not, maybe we didn't talk about it, or it wasn't as pronounced. But when I came here, and I came to Canada back in, 1983. And then I realized, I thought, why? There's a different perception. There really was a bit of a different perception, and I couldn't get it. I didn't understand it because I'd never lived it. And then I started to realize that people would talk about it, that, there was differences where people would treat you differently. And I'm like, really? How? And then my brother-in-law at that time, he wasn't my brother, he was my eldest sister's boyfriend. He talked a little bit about what it was like to be Indian, of Trinidadian background, growing up in Mississauga, all those years ago. And there was a definite difference. And I was like, oh, not realizing it. And then that was my first instinct, that there was a lot more maybe overt difference versus the covert, maybe potentially, that we grew up in, because we grew up around diversity. Compared to where you're saying that out in rural Saskatchewan, there was less of that. Do you think it was because it was a little town and the kind of the cohesiveness of the small environments?
Yes. I'm got a deep love for Saskatchewan. I believe the cold weather also unites people together. The small community definitely made a difference. And quite honestly, my father, holding a position of chemistry and physics teacher in the school, held a position of power in some respects. Right. So we showed up that way. So I think that also had influence. And so there's that. Also, I truly believe the mindset my parents held made a difference. They came in to be of service. Right. And so people received that in a very inclusive way as well. So I think that also added the layer to it, for sure. And this is in the early 70s. Okay. I'm going to age myself here.
Likewise, me.
Yeah. So in the early 70s, there was, I don't remember experiencing racism. I still, have to really dig deep and think where that is. But again, my parents would have protected us. So I would say that that's probably the bigger piece of it.
And it's so interesting because I even though you and I have met, we've never had this kind of conversation, because we're in a professional group. We get up there, we talk to each other, we chit chat, and we go and we write, and we finish it off. So let's talk a little bit about what you actually did before this time in organizations with, and BIPOC is a term that I think is now coming. So it's Black, Indigenous people of color. So, and I remember you and I even chatting about it a couple months ago and saying, okay, Kanchan, tell me what that means. But when with your work, like you said, you were in strategy teams in healthcare. What is it that you learned about teams prior to this time and diversity and leadership that's kind of been maybe enunciated even more so today? Because you've been doing this kind of work for quite a while.
I have. For the last 7 years, I've been doing this work in terms of as an executive coach, facilitation of leadership communications programs. Prior to that, my own lived experience, as naivety gives you, I'm not necessarily aware of it because I wasn't looking for it. Yours and my story is similar that way. I wasn't aware and I wasn't looking for it because of the place of privilege I came from, where I didn't experience it like others would have. What I always recall, though, is always feeling like an outsider. And where that outsider comes from is that I didn't have the same cultural references as everyone else's, which is odd because I grew up here. And when I went home, my parents didn't flip on the latest Disney show. Like we didn't watch all the latest Disney shows or whatever. Of course, I would watch whatever was on the handful of channels that we had to dial on our TV. It's the piece that I would say I didn't understand, that I was different. I felt I was different. And I would chalk it up to, well, I'm a bit of a loner. But let's be clear, the values I was taught were the similar ones that you were taught as well. You used, the terms working hard and follow through. That's what, absolutely. My parent, put your head down, you get your work done. People will tap you, people will tell you, people will guide you in what they need. Just do your work. And to some degrees that does work. Absolutely. You'll be recognized for that. And where I see now in the work I do with, yes, you're right, BIPOC is the term of the last year. Prior to that, culturally diverse leaders. There's different terms. In Canada, there is actually a legal term called VisMin, which is visible minority, which
VisMin, okay.
Yeah, which is not, it's not received well. So I would say that when I think to where people are at now and they're looking at, I can put my head down, I can get my work done, but the reality is I have to have a certain understanding of the political landscape of my organization, or I need to understand what's actually, I need to lift my head up, essentially, is what it is. And where I've been able to do that is, yes, I was brought up in here. I knew enough to make the conversations I needed to make and all of that when I was in healthcare. And it wasn't enough to put my head down and just get the work done. It wasn't. It wouldn't have been. I got rewarded to doing the work I did because I did have the ability to have a certain amount of conversations with people.
So let's say prior to the situation with Floyd, right? And you were dealing with, and you said the thin edge of the wedge for you and your spot that you work most with are women of color. What were some of the pressures, or maybe they still are the same pressures, but maybe it's the same, or maybe it's been times by 10, I'm not so sure. What were some of the pressures that women of color in executive positions would experience?
So one of the, and there is a slight difference since the murder of George Floyd. What I would say prior to that, one of the challenges that women of color would have is that they would be passed over because just from the point of view, there was a lot, for example, a lot of the corporate spaces have sort of percentages. They want to have an increase of gender, that women into the workforce. That was diversity. It's not from a race perspective. I mean, I sit at the intersectionality of race and gender, but gender was one of the things. So what you would have is potentially women leaders going in. So women of color could be passed because they didn't have all that was required, meaning part of it is, when I speak to a lot of women leaders right now, they're like, I'm new into this culture and I'm not sure. They have MBAs, they've got PhDs. It's amazing the amount of education, but not fully aware of how to use it, where they, I don't understand the full stories. I was just speaking to a leader just prior to this, and that was one of the challenges she had. She goes, I came to this country with an 11-month-old, and I did my MBA without any family support, doing an executive MBA, raising my child, and then getting selected for one of the bank's MBA programs.
Mm.
And I still didn't understand the cultural nuances that I needed to understand, because I put my head down, I did my work, and I got in for my work. And now I'm sort of, now how do I handle what I need to handle? How do I get noticed? How do I get
Excuse me.
mentors? Bless you. How do I get mentors? How do I get, sponsorship in a way that is more sort of natural? So I would say one of the things when we look at any of the statistics, the highest number of executives or leaders are white men. Then we've got white women, and then it's men of color, and then women of color. The challenges come into, they are as one of the strengths that we have as women is the ability to do. We do.
Mhm.
We do a lot, and we do it well. Challenge with that is we become a really good number two and not a number one. We're busy getting it done. We understand it. We've got it all. So you add that, and you add race to that as well. So the miss continues to happen. I'm just going to leap ahead a little bit in terms of George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd. The impact that happened there was, I was starting to see women of color, even men of color, going, hang on here, actually, I don't want the spotlight on. I don't want to be known because of my race right now. I'm trying too hard to get into the organization and the culture that it holds. And so it's one of these kind of, is this the visibility I want?
Wow.
Being invisible and being visible, and the paradox of having sort of as a visible minority, being invisible, feeling that for a lot of your time, and then all of a sudden having the spotlight shone on you. And with the intentions, I think, with a lot of organizations in a very positive way, awareness of social inequities, systemic racism, really in a positive kind of, we need to look at this. And yet, when you see the leaders going, hang on, a lot of the conversations that I held with a lot of the leaders was around, if you don't believe that when you walk into a room that your race isn't noticed, then it's being naive. So own that, be aware of it, own that, and continue to work in the unity of the organization that you are in. So that's a real important piece. Like, it's not okay to just step back and go, please don't look at me for this, because you've already walked into a room with all of who you are. We know that already in terms of energy and all of that. So it's from the color space. So that's the piece that I would say where I saw women or BIPOC leaders before and after George Floyd, what's happened. And up to and including last week, when I spoke to a lot of BIPOC leaders with the insurgents on Capitol Hill, the piece that came up was anger. It's like, it just feels way too raw right now to have that come forward. And so it's the piece of, okay, that anger needs to happen for change to happen. We get that. The piece is, what do we do with this now? So what is the piece that we need to look at? So I just sort of shared this with a few leaders this morning. One, let's just step back for a second and stay where our hands are. This is where our power is. So the first question is, as we think about the anger, and I see the BIPOC leaders going, I can't believe this is where we're at. It's yes, take a breath, feel that anger, start to believe that, yes, this is where, for example, in the US, a lot of my colleagues are at. And then take a breath to go, okay, how am I showing up every day with all of who I am? So it doesn't become a surprise to someone, let alone myself, who I am and how I'm coming into it, coming into the room. So part of that is something as simple as getting clear on what are my traditions that I bring into my workspace every day.
Yeah.
What are some of the traditions and values that I've been brought up with? One of the great stories that and I'll just share this with you quickly, the great story that I heard about this was around the past president of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi. And one of the things that she did is that any of the executive that came to, that she hired in, she wrote a letter to their parents to thank them for raising such a great leader. And so from an Indian value perspective, your parents are important.
Yes.
So she brought a tradition of what was important to her and brought that into her executive level at that point. And it's just sort of extending it out.
What a nice thing. Because of course, your parents, right? Like, I was, on a walk with a friend and I said, after all these years, my parents are generally somebody that I speak to my parents generally every day to some degree, even if it's for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And she goes, really? I go, yeah, really. Even when they're bothered, I go, yeah, whether I'm having a disagreement, I'm like, how you doing, Dad? So fine. Okay. And my parents are separated as well, right? Which is different. But I love that because I think oftentimes, so I married quite young and moved to a small town where I am now. When I moved to this small town, I was the only non-white person there. And people would look because they had probably never potentially seen anybody that was non-white. And I'd be like, what? I would say to my ex at the time, what are they looking? He goes, he says, he would say to me, they're looking at you because you're so beautiful. And I'm like, no, man, they're looking at me because I'm different. And then after a while, it was just because people had no, small town, not too far outside of Toronto. But it's because people, something so different, and to me, I'm like, I'm just like, no, I'm not like everybody else. And it was that comfort. And my in-laws at that time had never met anybody non-white, much less, okay, well, she speaks English. I think she speaks better than my son. Kind of thing. So it's sometimes I honestly believe it was a lack of exposure to anything that was not true, the homogeneous kind of Canadian upbringing. And then when my family got to know my culture and from the Caribbean, I played Caravana like for years. And then my husband would be in the parades and people are like, where's he go? Well, he's going to be in the parade. What's the parade about? It's in a band. What instrument are you playing? No, it's not an instrument. It's actually you're regaling and you're dressed up and and then it was such an embrace because people love the diversity. But I think it was a lack of knowledge because it was so different. My culture was a lot different, but people loved it once they got to know a bit more. They got to know me, right, which was such a nice thing. Coming from like from an island to school to here, kind of thing. So I think it's that whole concept, like you said. It's like people need, and when then people would look forward to, what are you doing this year for Caravana? Or, okay, is your mother going to make that, chickpea and potato curry again with the roti? Because we can't wait to try it and all that stuff. So I think I love this concept that, you're saying the PepsiCo CEO is doing. It's because it's an invitation in to something that's just such value to me. Like, I mean, of course, the Indian culture is always about community. I grew up in a little village in Trinidad called Diamond, and the community was the most important thing. It was, because my history compared to yours is different because my ancestors, like from my dad's side, they were indentured laborers. So they went to be cane farmers. And so the history, and my mother's is potentially Indian, we don't know 100%, with Middle Eastern. So they were merchants. So when my history is a lot different. And when I understand the breadth, I just watched a 6-part series on YouTube on indentured labor. I was like blown away just about the things and the privilege then that, my ancestors, all the things they had to go through to, like, you go back to that concept of, you carrying your ancestors on your. I was listening to that with on an interview with Oprah and Maya Angelou, that I'm carrying 10,000 ancestors with me on either side of me. It becomes, it kind of goes back to those, like you said, you put your head down, you work hard. However, that to some degree that could become a bit of an impediment or a obstacle that in leadership potentially, in working so hard, not looking strategically at the horizon.
Well, and talking of lineage, I mean, we all come from strong human beings, that we are, our generation is right here. Like, our lineage is quite powerful and quite strong. And so we are here. And part of the reason we're here is that we've adapted a little bit each time. We adapt to survive. We adapt to get to where we are. And with that, we take a look at, especially women of color in corporate spaces, what's needed. As a simple example, going for drinks back in the day before COVID, going for drinks on the end of a Thursday night. And who's the first one that doesn't go? A lot of them are, culturally diverse leaders are like, I'd rather go home to my family. I'd rather, I've put enough time in. Why? Our heads down, we're doing a lot of work. And it's like, I want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't serve us. That does not serve us. It is very important. It's not to say you have to have a drink. You can have a Coke.
Right.
It's the act of connection. It's the act of creating community at where you're working. So it's small gestures, and they're important gestures when we stop and we look at how do we do the best that we can do in the environment that we're around.
So to some degree, what we're talking about is, I think of it as two bubbles. I can kind of think of my kind of traditions and my values, beliefs, assumptions, and all the things that make me me. And then I go into a corporate world, and there's all the values that go within that context of the macro. And how do I, as a leader, then kind of, marry the two somewhere along the way, if you've never kind of thought that through? To your point, sponsorship and all those things, and am I doing the things that's going to get me recognized, even though I'm probably one of the hardest workers, but I'm not doing some of those little meaningful things to kind of get that recognition.
Absolutely. And in a lot of my experience, I see corporations, organizations really hungry and wanting to do and wanting to help. How do I bring people in? Because there is awareness of how important diversity of thought is. And that diversity of thought comes from a place of diversity of experience. And so it's not that myself as a BIPOC leader and just doing an uphill climb. People are ready to meet and do whatever is needed as well. Organizations are. And let's be clear, a lot of that is, it's good for business. The bottom line is financially, it's very important. It's rich for, it's helpful for any organization in terms of a business sense, for sure. And it's still there. Mm-hmm. So there is a desire to create, diversity of thought, diversity of experience. And at some point it may have just sat in the gender space. Since this past year, it's absolutely looking at the race perspective as well. So what do we have to do? What do we have to do as BIPOC leaders? We need to step into that and own it. Know that, race does matter. Race is there, whether we think it is or not. And how can I best represent myself as a leader? Knowing who I am. Mm-hmm. Who am I? Who are those 10,000 peoples on both sides? What's the lineage I bring with me? Because it's so critical to have all of me show up, not just for the organization, but for me as well. So I will feel comfortable to go for drinks on a Thursday night when I can in the world, or I can have a Zoom call with people just because I want to sit and have a social gathering, be part of a social gathering.
Yeah, I love that perspective, because I hadn't really thought about it. So at the time I was an executive, I didn't have a child at that point, so I would do a lot of those things, right? But it's so true, not knowing that, like you're saying, if the perception is I just do what's expected of me, I may be doing phenomenal things, but I may not be, kind of in the right place at the right time to have that conversation, with I'll give you an example. I was with the CEO that I worked for. It's a small firm when I began. And I remember he got on the elevator because he was still on, and people started like bolting off. I'm like, I sat on that. I'm like, the opportunity to sit with the CEO on the elevator, I'm not getting off. And I said, well, jokingly, because now you're left, there's you and one other person and the CEO. I said, do you often do this too? And he started to laugh. He goes, I don't think I do. I go, and he just looked at me and I go, I'm so happy to meet you in person yet again, because I met him really high level, and then start to chit chat with him. He goes, and you are, and he goes, of course I know your name. I said, okay, so do I. And we just had a nice little interface, and I was about like a very, quick elevator ride. And I said, so nice to, spend this little time with you. I hope to see you around, right? Because he'd be coming in once in a while for a board meeting that was high level. But again, not knowing, I just did that because I thought, well, this is an opportunity. I'm probably not going to get it again.
Yes. And how powerful that you just kind of went, I'm not going to jump off, I'm going to stay in. And I can tell you, in all my years of coaching executive women or women leaders of color, that's the tenacity I see. Not so much as I'm doing this because it's the right thing, like I have to do this because it's going to advance me, but it's like, well, this person's a human being just like I am. And I'm just going to, share in this conversation. And this is exactly why this example you've given me, which is why women of color need to be in more senior leadership positions. There is a human side that is looking at it, what is it, 7 years ahead? What are the impact of the 7 generations ahead of me in the work that we're currently doing? That women have a lens to, have a lot of, we could go on and on about, the research around men versus women in just a very general, not gender, but just sort of characteristics perspectives. And there is a lot of inclusivity, community, tend and befriend. That's what women do.
Tend and befriend and then you take it on a different cultural level too, is really always wanting to include, like, what I find is that's kind of, my friends will say, I'm the glue, because that's how I grew up. Like, my dad in my family, in his family, he played that role. I didn't think I was going to replicate it, but I love, to have people. I figure if I like you, Kanchan, more than likely you're going to like some of my friends. So what I would do is every year, this is me, my friends would probably say, yeah, she does this every year. I have birthday parties and I invite everybody, the women that I think will like each other. And then my Canadian friends will say, well, you can't do that. And I go, well, why not? I say, well, I think they like me, and you all like me. And they go, well, they don't know each other. I go, well, how are they going to get to know each other? And then, you have these, women from all different walks of life get together and they have a fantastic time over some hors d'oeuvres and a drink or whatever. So I always and I never thought about it, but I started to do that just because I wanted a birthday party. I said no presents. I just want to get together. And it's just become like a bit of a tradition. So that's my cultural bit. I would assume so, because get-togethers and connections and birthdays was something that my parents, for 6 of us, every single year they did something for each one of us, and it became a value that I had. So I could see how, innovation, if you think about innovation, is about diversity and originality of thoughts or experience or relationship and all those things. So in your work with women of diversity, I'm going to assume that they probably bring some of these quirky little things that I'm sharing with you, not knowing that it's, part of a culture. I'm thinking it's just because I'm Roxanne and that's kind of what I do.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that's exactly why, whether you're in a workspace or whether you're at home, how you show up, actually how you show up in one place is how you show up in every place, quite frankly. So
Right.
when we have women of color especially in a leadership perspective, there is a sense of building community everywhere I see, that, yes, that is through the experience that I've had in coaching these women, or teaching skills, whatever that is. It's a real, it's so innate that you don't even realize it's what you're doing. It's, it's just what's important.
So what I hear that's key is that awareness of diverse leaders and listening to their space and bringing that forth towards, whatever organization they're part of. And it morphs into something that brings breadth and depth to the organizations that they're with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Kanchan, I'm sure you and I could probably talk for a very long time. For people that are wanting to reach out or to consult or even potentially coach with someone like you, where could they reach you? And anything else that you want to share with people that are listening before I let you go?
Absolutely. Happy to have connection and conversations with anyone. LinkedIn is a great way to connect. I know you're on LinkedIn. And
Yes.
And it's kanchanprinsloo.com for my website. Happy to have a conversation, happy to support leaders of color, and as well executives who have BIPOC leaders that they're working with. I find myself in both spaces. So it's an opportunity to really fuel what my commitment is helping leaders, be it women of color, but BIPOC leaders, to lead powerfully as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm taking away? I'm taking away that I talk a lot about awareness and authenticity, but taking it down further based on my conversation today is don't hide what's unique about you and bring it with you, because that creates something so special, not just within yourself, but also the people that are around you that can then absorb that in some way and figure out how that creates more of that ability to connect at a deeper level. So Kanchan, thanks so much again. And for anyone needing support on authentic leadership, you can reach me at roxannedurhage.com.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannedurhage.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.